right? The real-time examples, right? So we don't like to share our details to anybody. So then you use encapsulation, simple. So how to achieve encapsulation? Basically, declare the instance variables of the class as a private so that variables nobody can access. So outside of the class, you cannot access. If you want to access or set your instance variable values, you have to use a public setter and getter methods to set or modify the value of the variable values. So the getter methods you can use for getting the data. So that's all setters and getters. Even setter methods also called mutator methods, and getter methods are called accessor methods because you're accessing. So that's why it is called accessor methods. That's all about encapsulation, and the first OOPS concept is done. Any questions before moving on to constructor? Okay, if you're good, we can move. Yeah. So in this next topic is Java constructor and inheritance we are going to discuss. Today, let's finish the constructor part. So constructor is a special type of method in Java. So it is used to initialize the objects. You want to initialize your class objects, there must be a constructor in the class. Okay, so constructor is generally invoked at the time of object creation. So where constructor is called, it is called at the time of object creation. It constructs the values. Basically, constructor will construct the values, provides data for the object, that is known as called constructor. So there are two types of constructors: default constructor and parameterized constructor. So default constructor and parameterized constructor. So default constructor is, so we'll go one by one. Default constructor is basically if there are no parameters, right? If there are no parameters in the parentheses, that is called default constructor. You can see, so the default constructor you will write like this. So access modifier, class name, so you can write the logic. And if there is no constructor in a class, compiler automatically creates a default constructor. Compiler automatically creates one default constructor. So that's the default constructor means. What is the advantage of default constructor? If a class has a default constructor, while creating object for the class, you don't need to provide any parameter values. You don't need to provide any parameter values. So this is how you can call, how you will use this default constructor. See, class name, reference variable equal to new class name. This is the default constructor. Then what is the purpose of default constructor? So default constructor provides the default values for the objects. Like your variables, default values is provided by default constructor. Suppose your no variable is an integer type. 0 will be the default value, will be constructed by this default constructor. And JVM will provide that default values for these instance variables. And null for the object. Your object, you didn't assign a value. So like new class name, you didn't write that. Then, so the default value for that object reference is a null. For a string also null. Float is 0.0. So like that, we have a default values. It will be constructed by this default constructor. Even if you don't provide also, for instance variables, it will be given a default constructor. So parameterized constructor. So a constructor that have parameters is known as a parameterized constructor. A constructor that have parameters is known as a parameterized constructor. So the syntax of parameterized constructor is access modifier, class name, parenthesis data type P1, comma data type P2. You can write the logic. That's the parameterized constructor purpose and no syntax. Basically, this is the syntax. So then why do you need a parameterized constructor? You can provide a different values to the distinct objects. You can provide different values for the different object. So each object, you can give your own values. So this is another way to set your variable values, instance variable values through parameterized constructor. One is through setter methods. You can give values with the setter methods for your instance variables. Another way is how you can set your instance variable values is through parameterized constructor. Then you don't need a setter methods if you have a parameterized constructor. You remember in the stockkeeper, I didn't write the setter method. I have written a parameterized constructor there. So this one. See, I didn't write a setter method, but I have written only getter method. So this is the parameterized constructor only I have written. While calling time, I have given this parameter value. See, object creation time itself, we are giving the parameter value. That's what I'm talking about here. So parameterized constructor is used to provide different values to the distinct objects. If a class has a parameterized constructor, like this. So this is a parameterized constructor. This, while creating object, you are passing the value. Object line itself, you are passing the value. So that is this parameterized constructor, how you will use a parameterized constructor in the code. So class name reference variable equal to new class name. You are passing, see this parameter 1 value. Value only need to pass. Parameter 2 value. Again, you should not write data type well. So object creation type. You have to give value only. Value only you have to give. So that's a parameterized constructor. So constructor overloading. Constructor overloading means, so constructor overloading is basically a class have multiple constructors with different parameter list and data type. With different parameter list and data type. So data type can be different. Parameter list also, it's a different. Then you can use a constructor overloading Sept. Then how it will differentiate the compiler? Because constructor name is same for all the constructors in the class. Only based on the number of parameters in the each constructor. One constructor might have 0 parameters. One constructor might have 1 parameter. Another constructor might have 2 parameters. Another constructor might have 3 parameters. Based on the number of parameters or data type. At least parameter count is same, but the data type of the parameter should be different for at least 1 parameter. So that's how the compiler will recognize that constructor, which constructor we are going to call while creating object. That's the constructor overloading. And so what are the rules for creating a constructor? The constructor name must be same as its class name. Constructor must have no explicit return type. That means no return type for the constructor. See, access modifier after immediately you're writing the class name. That's the constructor nature. And the class name after you're putting a parenthesis. Right? So that's the constructor structure. It don't return anything. No explicit return type means no return type at all. Void and any other data type you won't write. That's only for methods. Methods will return, but a constructor doesn't return anything. A Java constructor cannot be abstract, static, final, and synchronized. That means you should not use in the constructor line these keywords. Anywhere. These are what kind of keywords? Non-access modifier keywords, right? Abstract, static, final, and synchronized, non-access modifier keywords. These keywords you should not use inside the constructor or constructor line at all. So static keyword you should not use, final keyword you should not use inside the constructor. So or in the constructor line also, you should not use these things. These are the rules you need to follow while creating a constructor. See, constructor name must be same as a class name. You create how many constructors? Every constructor, same class name only you will write. Then how it will be differentiated? So let me show you one example here. The real example I'll show you, the Selenium. Go to API doc and check packages. Selenium. Classes. There is a cookie class. If you see this cookie class, say cookie string name, string value. Cookie string name, string value, path. So can you observe this? The same is a class name. This is the class name, right? Say constructor name also same for all these are constructors. See, only parameter values are changing. Parameter count is changing. Here 2, here 3, here 4, like that. So that's the how, see, this is called constructor overloading. So one class can have multiple constructors with the different parameters and data type. That is called constructor overloading. That's what I'm showing constructor overloading means. And so let's go a difference between constructor and a method. Constructor is used to initialize the state of an object. Method is used to expose the behavior of an object. Constructor must not have return type and method must have a return type. Constructor is invoked implicitly and method is invoked explicitly. You need to call method, right, with object reference. But constructor, you don't need to know. Automatically it will call when you create object. So that's the this constructor. So Java compiler provides a default constructor if you don't have any constructor. So method is not provided by compiler any time. So only constructor will be provided by default. Even if you don't create all, just create a class, there will be one default constructor in the class. Constructor name must be same as its class name. A method name may or may not be same as its class name. So this is all about constructor. Please read encapsulation and constructor. Tomorrow constructor examples I will show you, programs. Then we'll move on to inheritance concept. Okay. So any questions?